Hi, my name is Nikki Winkler, and I'm giving my presentation today on the feminist theory of psychotherapy. The feminist theory is not necessarily counseling done by women, for women, with women. Instead, it's a theory that comes from a place of acknowledging the various roles that clients play within a society and identifying where their behavior may be the result from some type of oppression. The focus tends to be on those that are minorities or considered the most oppressed. Women, various racial and cultural ethnicities, those with various gender and sexual identities, those that have been marginalized. Feminist theories of psychotherapy came about as the roles of the oppression and the culture has on our psychological functioning, and it's become more and more apparent. These two topics were typically ignored in other various types of traditional psychotherapy. But as the counselor became more sensitive to the social and institutional challenges faced by women and people with varied cultural backgrounds, more attention has been paid to how oppression and sexism typically affect the role of the psyche and, and the psychological development of the client. According to this theory, characteristics that are often attributed to biology may actually be the result of survival responses that are displayed in situations of oppression. It may not be their actual biological behavior. It's just the response to the oppression. And so in reviewing this article that I read, titled Training Counseling Psychologists as Social Justice Agents, Feminist and Multicultural Principles in Action by Goodman, Lang, Helms, Latta, Sparks, and Weintraub, I was really fascinated by their view of the feminist theory because this article stresses that this theory cannot stand alone without including aspects of social justice. So feminist psychotherapy goes hand in hand with social justice. So what is social justice? Well, according to Goodman, it can be defined as a world in which everybody has access to the following: adequate food, adequate sleep, adequate wages, education, safety, opportunities, institutional supports, healthcare, childcare, and loving relationships. The word adequate, though, has different meaning for different people, but for this particular purpose, it generally means to have enough without starving, without being exploited by others, without being trapped or enslaved due to economic reasons, without the fear of being battered, and to be considered to have some self-value. The purpose of social justice within feminist psychotherapy is to promote and actively change social norms to include those of marginalized or disadvantaged groups of people. By doing so, counselors are affecting changes in the micro, the macro, and the meso levels. So the micro level is considered to be the individual's families and the individual themselves. The meso level includes organizations, communities, where these people work, where they live. The macro level includes policies and ideologies, basically the big picture. So while it is, of course, ideal to provide support at the micro level with the individual and their families, it's also necessary to promote social justice at the meso and macro levels. Otherwise, all we're doing is to simply provide support for people to attempt to exist within their status quo. So the point is to provide support for the individual while inspiring change within the social justice structure. If we do not influence change within the schools, within politics, businesses, the media, etc., then people will still have to utilize survival mechanisms to exist in the world of oppression, racism, cultural biases, and sexual orientation prejudices. These are the sources of the individual client's suffering, and they must be addressed. The journal article by Goodman emphasized social justice and the necessary participation by both the client and the counselor. So we can help individuals successfully navigate their own lives. But we can also affect social change on the macro level by getting involved, sharing our resources, and sharing our knowledge and skills. I was really intrigued by this perspective, and I plan to do additional research on this topic on my own. By pursuing social justice, we're helping not only one person, but we're helping that individual to change society's view regarding various groups of minorities. It was very inspiring to read this article. According to Goodman, there's 6 main pillars in feminist psychotherapy. There's ongoing self-examination, the sharing of power, giving voice, facilitating consciousness raising, and building on strengths. Then at the end, leaving clients with the tools for social change. So ongoing self-examination, and this is really for the counselor, involves knowing oneself and admitting and identifying our own biases. Every counselor brings to the table their own cultural and gender biases. To know what they are and how they affect your outlook is really essential to practicing feminist psychotherapy. So as a counselor, you need to know and understand yourself to be aware of how your own values and biases affect your actions as a counselor. And in doing so, you are going to have insight into the strengths of the client. You're going to understand their weaknesses. You're going to have just more insight. So the purpose isn't really to try to fake objectivity. That is not the purpose. It is instead a way to identify the roles, the various roles in our lives and our own gender biases, and to utilize those roles when necessary during counseling. The next pillar, sharing of power. The counselor needs to understand the power and the oppression that is present in the relationship between the community, between the client, basically in the micro, meso, and macro levels that the client exists within. So the counselor's role in feminist psychotherapy is not to be the one leading the counseling, but it is instead just to be another source of information. The counselor is to be a resource and a co-learner, because as a counselor, if you're working with minority groups, you are going to be learning as well. You are someone who can help advocate for that client. You can ensure that the client has access to resources, but you are going to be a co-learner and you are going to do this through collaboration with the client. The sharing of power includes consensual decision-making and collaboration. So as a result, it benefits not only the individual, but any groups that this individual then becomes a part of. This benefits the groups that the client becomes part of, and it benefits the communities, and it benefits the working places, every part of the macro, meso, and micro levels that the client lives in and works in. So the sharing of power should really go beyond just the individual client and become part of advocate groups that are working towards changing oppression. The next pillar, the pillar of giving voice, literally means giving voice to the oppressed. It's enabling those that are devalued by the dominant figures in society a chance to give new life by making themselves heard individually and within the greater society. It's finding others that are working towards a similar goal of anti-depression and getting their message out. Basically, it's strength in numbers. As counselors, we may not have experienced the oppression that our clients have, but we can act as advocates for that change. Through doing so, the counselor is not only helping to change society's views, but they're able to get a little bit of a glimpse into the world and perspective of the oppressed client. If you're working with those groups and you're working within that community, you will get glimpses into the oppression. You'll get glimpses into how the interactions occur and really the power. It's not quite the same as being the oppressed, but it does give the counselor additional experiences to draw from when working with the oppressed client. The next pillar of consciousness raising is really to bring about awareness of the roles that oppression can play in the part of many people's lives every day. The counselor can help the client to identify where the discrimination exists, how it's affecting his or her behavior or issue, kind of giving context to the situation that needs to be addressed. As indicated by Goodman, distress that comes from being silenced can be alleviated through awareness. The next pillar is that of strength. Strength is a pillar that's useful to any client that's going through any type of psychotherapy. By collaborating with the client, the counselor is able to help identify the strengths and the skills that the client already has. Everybody comes into the situation with their own set of strengths that's gotten them this far in life. So how has the client successfully dealt with various situations of oppression and stress so far? How did he or she do so? By identifying these current strengths, the client is able to further develop their skills. Together, the adaptive responses can be isolated and analyzed and determined as to whether or not they can be reframed to become a strength that can be used in future situations. And of course, the client will also gain confidence as they realize that they already possess much of the strength necessary to alter their specific exchanges or situations. So from a social justice perspective, much of the macro level fails to recognize the strengths that are inherent in many minority groups. Again, we need to fall back on the pillar of giving voice to bring awareness of the unique strengths of these groups that are essential to society and can contribute so much. The last pillar is to ensure that the client leaves with tools of their own that will allow them to help themselves and to seek out support organizations. This step necessitates collaboration between the counselor and the community, a lot of interaction, a lot of research. The counselor needs to identify what supports are currently available to marginalized groups. Working with the community and the clients is going to help the counselor to understand what types of support is already available and what types are needed yet. The goal is to eventually have enough momentum and support within the community without needing the intervention of the counselor. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about Mary Black's case. In the case of Mary Black, we're going to need to work together to identify the various roles that she's had where oppression may be present. Being a female is obviously a top issue. Being born into a family with an alcoholic father put Mary in a position where she faced not only a dominant male figure, but one who was typically drunk and angry. By abusing his position of power, he typically took his anger out on the female members of his family. Her mother modeled accepting behavior of the abuse, which could appear that the daughters may have also followed in her path. Her close relationship, though, with her mother may also be the result of adaptive survival within that situation. So I would explore that perspective a little bit more. That could actually have been a positive effect or an adaptation. I would explore her childhood depression from the perspective of being female with an abusive, dominant male that heads the family. I would also explore the way she shut down, especially in her teenage years, as a possible survival tactic when she was upset with both of her parents. She obviously chose to withdraw and suppress her own voice during this period of time, and we need to figure out what happened and how that happened and how that can perhaps be changed in the future. I would then examine her choice of significant others. She continues to choose male figures that are dominant with substance dependencies. Through this, she may have felt some type of power in their need to take care of them. This is maladaptive behavior, but may have been what helped her to survive or to fulfill her feelings of being needed. This angle needs to be explored further, as it was a survival technique that contributed to her stress. Throughout Mary's life, she appeared to be uncomfortable being alone. We'd need to talk more about this, as this seemed to be a stressor that led her to making some negative decisions and choosing a companion, and to fall back on some of those old adaptive habits. Collaboratively, we'd need to identify Mary's strengths and what got her through her difficult times in life. She does abstain from alcohol and drugs, which gives her a position of power over those that don't. So this is definitely a positive strength of hers that she's going to need to continue. Her ability to earn a living, even while she's taking care of others, is also a strength, along with her ability to nurture relationships, even when they're negative. Others find Mary to be very dependable, and she's helped others throughout their life. If we can isolate and discover more of Mary's strengths, then we can further develop them together so she can use those strengths to move forward in a positive manner. As an aspect of social justice, we could find organizations that provide support to women that are codependent or spouses of alcoholics to further give Mary a choice to be heard or a voice to be heard. Thank you.